Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to hear a crazy story that might change your perspective on success, not only on YouTube, but in life in general. There's this guy named Dan Koe. He's a YouTube creator. He's on Twitter. He's all over the place. You guys have probably seen him. He is the guru of not only systems, but of writing. He's a man with a method for everything, and he's made millions of dollars simply by using the power of his brain and the internet. This isn't going to be a rags to riches story. I don't want you guys to think that. There's some really interesting things that I think we can all learn from Dan's story, his upbringing, the things that he's gone through. This is about someone who saw value, broke all the rules, and made his own fortune in a very unexpected way. You guys, this is a little bit of a digression from the drama that I'm typically bringing, but I think it's really cool to pick apart people who are doing things really, really well, analyze their success, so that way you guys can also take some of the things that they're doing, incorporate it into your content strategy, into your strategy for success in general, and hopefully achieve the goals that you want to achieve. So you're probably wondering, Uncle Raph, what is his secret? How did Dan Koe rise to the top so fast? Well, buckle up, my friends, because we're about to dive into his journey, and it is good. It's really good. Why? All right, you guys, I'm going to share the goodies, but before I do, we need to take a walk back in time to 2016 when Dan was just a wee babe of 20 years old. He was just like you and me, nothing extraordinary, right? The makings of extraordinary things. But in that moment, he was, walking through life, doing his thing, trying to figure out what was next. There was one thing that made him stand out, something that would set him apart in the years to come. You want to know what it was? I'm sure you do. Dan was observant. That's a word that you don't really hear too much. But it makes a whole lot of sense in this. I'm going to tell you why here in just a second. This observance led to an insatiable curiosity. You guys, once you start seeing things outside of the lens of your typical programming, you gain a different perspective, and that perspective leads to counterintuitive thinking. It leads you to start thinking differently than the way that you were raised to think. And that is the secret for success. Dan knew early on that the traditional 9-to-5 grind and the traditional way of thinking wasn't for him. He could see that it would limit his potential to make the money that he wanted and live the dream life that he had been thinking about. Leave it in the comments if you can relate. How many of you guys are in the same boat? You're like, I want all of these things. Did you know that there's a good chance that your programming has led to what we call limiting beliefs? When you're limited in your growth by the things that you believe about yourself, it's one of the biggest deterrents of success. Do you believe in yourself? At the age of 20, Dan attempted college and decided to major in business because that's where the money is, right? How many of y'all are business degrees? How far did that get you? But deep inside, Dan knew that this wasn't the direction for him. He was so focused on his interests, and college is so focused on creating cogs in a machine that his time in college didn't last long. At one point, he even tried to launch a fitness channel on YouTube together with his friend. Fitness was an interest to him. Obviously, if you have an interest and you're like, I want to start a business, it's probably a good place to start is the things that you're interested in. So why not give it a try? Dan perceived that working on YouTube is not something that he could keep doing for the rest of his life. That's another problem that a lot of people have, is you start to feel trapped in the decisions that we make. How many of you guys have gone to college and you have created a career out of the profession that you thought that you wanted when you were in college, only to start to feel trapped in that? I thought I was going to be a dentist. Look at me now. Mom, ain't you proud? So with Dan, building this fitness YouTube channel gave him a lot of satisfaction until it was exhausting. So what happens? It's one of the first key takeaways from Dan's life. It's also important to understand when it's okay or appropriate to quit a certain project, just as much as it's important to know when to continue with it, right? There is this sunk cost effect. When you pour so much money into a certain direction that you're like, I have to keep pouring money into this, or I have to keep going down this path. It's like, if I back out now, I will have wasted all that money. Well, do you continue wasting money towards something that might not ever create success, or do you pull back? And I think most people just keep wasting money. So for Dan, when he was 20 years old, these were some of his beginnings, right? 20 years old, you're doing things, you're testing new things. But there was about to appear a turning point. Dan, one night, as he was partying with his friends, as a lot of college students do, he was arrested in a minor offense, but it was enough to change his perspective. He went from Dan Koe 1.0 to Dan Koe 2.0. And this is the beginning of some of the more interesting aspects of his life that I'm going to get into as we're moving forward. So he didn't end up going to jail, but the case was prolonged for months and he was faced with thousands of dollars of fines. Emotional stress, in other words. As a 20-year-old, that's a lot to think about. In this low point, he wrote a book called The Power of Now, which he says changed his mentality to a higher level. If any of you guys read that book, leave it in the comments below. It taught him to be more aware of events and situations in his life, and since then, he's began to view life differently. He was able to gain an understanding and knowledge about responsibility, freedom, and most importantly, spirituality, which would help direct and lead him in the future to the Dan Koe that we all know now. At this point, Dan was starting to dabble in photography and YouTube. He acquired a camera and began shooting images and then uploading them to Instagram. He calls this another turning point for him, since it was not only about photography, it was about design, social media, and the learning process of getting him into a frame that would allow him to build upon a foundation. So he gained a couple thousand followers on Instagram, which to him was a big deal at the time. Like for most people, getting a couple thousand followers on Instagram is pretty awesome, right? You feel pretty good about yourself. I've got 2,000, now I want 4, now I want 5, now I want 10 and 20 and 100. And Instagram, if you don't give me 100,000 followers, I'm out. All right, that's how it feels sometimes. It's never enough, right? But here's the thing. Dan didn't know how to make money from his Instagram feed. And that's when Dan got the next idea. Like many young entrepreneurs, Dan started asking the big question: how can I make 6 figures online? How can I do this full time? So Dan actually saw a trend in Facebook ad agencies, and so he jumped on that bandwagon. He purchased a course, filled out his credit card information, and he dedicated himself to learning about acquiring clients with cold email, Facebook advertising, and other stuff that comes in those courses. But guess what, you guys? That didn't work either. So like any entrepreneur, Dan at this point in his life had faced ups and downs. Everybody looks at your endpoint. They all look at your most successful endpoint and they're like, that's what I want. How did he get that? That was so easy. They don't look at the entire journey to get there. One of the quotes that I heard, I don't remember who it was, maybe it was Hermosi who said it. He said, everybody's jealous of where you're at now, but nobody is jealous of how you got there. If you're in the beginning of your journey, or if you're 50 years old and you're looking at what we're doing, listening to this story about Dan Koe, and you're like, man, that's what I want. But you've never settled into the fact that you have to work hard to get there, and you shy away from the effort that it takes to be successful, then you're not going to be successful, because this is part of the process. You try, you fail, you learn. You try, you fail, you learn. You try, you succeed, you learn. It's always about learning. And in order to get that education, you have to go through some hard stuff. So Dan started this little Facebook agency. He tried to reach out to some people by cold email, by Facebook. He sent out 50 emails. None of them had been replied to. Most people at this point would have given up, but Dan asked himself a profound question. What do I really care about? Is it Facebook ads? Is it YouTube? Is it something completely different? Is it something offline? And then what ended up happening is Dan got another idea. See, Dan was kind of into parties and festivals and raves. And so he asked himself, what kind of products do people buy who are also into these things? So that's when he decided to create his first real product, the Diamond Bra. Yeah, that's right. He created a bra with sparkles on it. Not a mistake. As adults, we think about this and we're like, but Dan, it was a legitimate thing that was like, okay, these people like this stuff, so may as well, let's invent it. I'm sure you guys have come across these young millionaire CEO videos where a person narrates how he established an e-commerce store and became very wealthy. Well, that's not what happened here. Dan didn't sell any, not even a single bra. However, failure wasn't an option. Now, he did give up on this product, but it did fuel him towards his next venture. So he changed it up again and went ahead and learned how to code. He took a class in college, saw the possibility of freelancing, and liked the concept of not having to go without a degree to make money. With only a few weeks, because he was so passionate and dedicated, he was able to learn the equivalent of a year's worth of coding by studying it himself. How many of you guys have ADD where it allows you to hyper focus or fixate on learning something in an amount of time that it normally takes somebody else a long time to do. I ended up getting my Series 7 and 66 licenses, my securities licenses, when I was like 22 years old. And I self-studied. I bought a book. It was about this thick. I read it page by page, the entire thing. Within a couple of months, I went and took my test and I passed with flying colors, right? How many of you guys are able to do that? You know, as I'm focusing on studying Dan's success, this is one of the things I feel like we have in common. If I'm super passionate about something, I can learn something super fast. So this is when Dan discovered that he could get acquainted with anything and learn very quickly, a factor that would help him later on in his business. And then just like that, Dan had another business idea. He understood that web developers worked for long hours in front of screens, hence his invention of blue light glasses. However, as had been said before, he encountered difficulty. Typically what happens, he had no money to start this idea. So he went to his father, and jokingly, Dan asked his dad for $3,000 to start the glasses, and his dad agreed. Much to his amazement, his dad was locked in. And this was a major shift because for the first time, Dan saw that there was someone else out there who believed in what he was doing. Then in 2020, Dan joined Twitter, and this is where everything started to take off for him. He may have been a newcomer to the platform, but that didn't deter him. He made systems for himself, discovered how to write good content, and began to network. His system was, I'm not going to aim at the crowd that's ahead of me, but I'm going to aim at the crowd who were a bit behind me. His Twitter following grew tremendously after he shared his story and helped other people. He was no longer just a freelance web designer, he was evolving into a brand. And that's the crazy part. He concluded that he didn't need a niche, he was the niche. Such an important aspect, you guys. And I talk to our clients about this all the time. If you are the brand and people are coming back for you, it doesn't matter what you say because they're there for you. They love you. So become the brand. Content's not the brand. The niche isn't the brand. You are the brand. And if you can create a community that falls in love with you, it becomes so much easier for you guys to grow your YouTube channel. And the rest is history. Dan Koe now makes millions of dollars a year selling courses and consulting and coaching. He's got over 800,000 followers on his YouTube channel. You guys, Dan Koe's rise to success is rooted in just a few things. Authenticity, it's rooted in value, it's rooted in becoming the brand and forming a community around himself. He became successful by being himself. And in this generation of AI and automation where it's dominating the market, realness, authenticity, creativity is gaining more importance than ever before. If there's one thing that you take away from Dan's journey, it's this. Don't attempt to imitate others. Don't be someone else. Do what you like and provide value, and success will follow. And who knows, you might be the next Dan Koe. Oh, and if you guys like this, leave it in the comments below and I'll do more breakdowns of other successful creators and their personal stories. Check out this video right here where I break down how to start your own cult. See you on the next one, guys. Later, bye.